Let us begin today with the last part of two uses of language. As we have seen yesterday, what Richards is talking about the truth in criticism, and he mentioned in the second point that we discussed yesterday that the most usual other sense is that of acceptability and how acceptability works and how acceptability is developing and how it is different from real world to fictional world. Even we talked about the examples used by I. Richards, Thomas Reimer's analysis of tragedy and how he talks about Iago and what he feels, what he expects about Iago. He discussed. Even we talked about Walter Pater and his idea of surplusage. That means we have discussed already about the different examples quoted by I. Richards in response to deal with acceptability as one of the most important sense that is used for truth in criticism. Reimer, because where yesterday we stopped at the example of Reimer given by I. Richards, where Richards is talking about the villainous activity of Iago from Othello. And he said that the truth, Reimer observes, is this author's head was full of villainous and unnatural images. That's why he has brought such type of villain into existence. So we are accepting the characters as presented by the writers in its form without making those characters or without comparing those characters with the real incidences, real persons of life. Furthermore, what Reimer and Richards for proving the argument of acceptability, he's trying to give certain examples in this regard. When he's talking about Reimer, he's mentioning that Reimer is remembering the remarks of Aristotle that the artist must preserve the type and yet ennoble it. This is the statement by Aristotle. And Reimer, what Richards is analyzing and mentioning, that Reimer has interpreted this particular sentence in his own way. Because if you are developing a character of villain, And when you are developing a character of villain, at that time, if you are trying to justify that the villain is coming into the fictional world because certain unnatural things, certain villainous mind, the creative writer is having, and that's why he has projected such type of character. Now, when he is saying such type of statement, when he is mentioning, when he is putting such type of statement, Richards is saying that it is the interpretation made by Reimer by his own, taking support of Aristotelian sentence called the artist must preserve the type and yet ennoble it. The artist, what Aristotle is expected in saying, that the artist must preserve the type. Whatever type he is writing of, he should think of preserving that type, not destroying that particular type. If a writer writing things in tragedy, in the format of tragedy, he should try first to preserve the form of tragedy, and the second thing is that he should improve, he should bring certain novelty into it, he should make certain interesting things into it, he should make noble, he should try to make it noble. That is what Aristotle mentioned about writing of the things. But Reimer, when he is using Shakespearean play Othello and talking about Iago, and Iago, if he is appearing as the most treacherous villain, then it was that artist's mind who created him is also following that type of mindset. Now the role of the villain is preserved and try to ennoble it, try to make it try to develop it in such a way that it should make, or it should always make most of the people to feel that yes, this is how a villain should be, this is how a villain should behave like. But Reimer is interpreting this sentence in his own way, that it is not that it is ennobling of that particular type of writing, but it is the images, it is the image that the author is carrying in his mind, and that's why he has projected such type of person. And so we are giving acceptability to it. Now, for Reimer, the type is fixed simply by the convention. If you want to project a villain, this type is fixed and it is a conventional type, that okay, the villain who is mm, making harm, who is behaving in a way which is not supportive to the hero, or villain, the one who is negating the whole aspect that the protagonist or the hero is trying to build up and trying to be an hindrance, trying to be an obstacle into the development of the hero. It is a convention, and it is a conventional understanding of that character called villain. And when Reimer is talking about villain, he is simply blaming directly to the author, that the author has not taken into consideration this particular thing. But what I Richards is trying to point out, that Reimer or Reimer or the critics who are directly blaming the author regarding to the development of certain character, in that case they are forgetting the internal necessity of that particular plot, that how and why this character is being developed in such a way. There is certain internal necessity, and this internal necessity may be possible critics will not take note of this internal necessity, because they used to judge the character with an external canon. They are not having any understanding of the internal development of the action, why this action is taking place, what are the internal necessary things that took place to develop this character in such a way. And that's why they are trying to judge the character with an external canons without understanding the internal necessity of that development of the character. And Richards is having objection for such type of understanding. He is pointing out that Reimer is an extreme case, but to avoid his error in subtle matters, if you want to avoid his errors in subtle matter, that okay, let it be. If he's thinking like this, then that's the problem of Reimer, that Reimer is applying his external canons to it. But to avoid his errors in subtle matters is in fact sometimes the hardest parts of critics' understanding. Now, if you are ignoring him, that means you have to realize, you have to find it out that it is a very difficult part, it is a very difficult thing that you are simply trying to point out, that what hardest part, what are the difficult part that critic is trying to understand, how he is understanding this. If Reimer, because he has chosen an example of Iago as the most treacherous villain in Shakespearean tragedy. Now this Reimer, when he is talking about Iago, saying that this is an unnatural images and full of villainous things that was appearing in author's head, and that's why he has been created in such a way. Now if you say these are the subtle matters, but it is the most hardest idea, hardest part of critics understanding, or what sort of thing critic is undertaking. It is the most difficult part, and if he is commenting on such a difficult part in such a way, then the concept of acceptability, which is part of, which is because of the internal necessity of that particular action. But whether our conception of type is derived in some such absurd way, what is our understanding? What is our understanding of the type? How we conceive it? And if you are conceiving it that okay, I have to find out the thing or to develop a character which is same as in real life. If you are trying to get it in the same way, if you are finding out that this thing is happening in the same manner, then it will be difficult for us. It is something like uh, what Aristotle has even explained, that uh, when you are copying certain things, you have to understand the process that is becoming part of that creative person's mind. It is not like that you are taking certain uh, example from handbook of zoology and trying to bring exact thing, exact image as you are expecting to be. That means you cannot apply external canons. You cannot take a, an example of external canons to undertake or to analyze or to criticize or to understand the character of fictional world, because the character of fictional world is having its own acceptability. and his behavior is judged with an condition of internal necessity. Again, if you find it out that it is, if any critic is taking support of an external canon, this is what Richards is trying to bring out. If a critic is taking a support of external canon, then it is critically dangerous. That is what Richards' remarks are. It is extremely dangerous if the critic is taking support of external canon to understand the character of a fictional world. It is same like that you are trying to find out the fictional character to be part of your real life and real life character to be part of the fictional world. You cannot apply the rules of external or real life to the characters of fictional world, because the character of fictional world is immortal. He will never come to an end. As I said you earlier also, immediately as you open the page of the book, the character will once again alive. By the end of that last page of that book, it might be possible the character will die at the end of the book, and once again you open the first page of the book, the character will once again come alive in front of you. Now, if you are applying an external canon to it, how will you able to criticize it? How will you able to understand it and being a critique of certain things? You need to realize this important fact, and that is what I. Richards is trying to bring out with the two uses of language. This is possible with scientific use of language, but if you are using an emotive use of language, it is impossible to have this type of understanding. In the same connection, he also used another quote by Thomas Reimer. And Thomas Reimer wrote in his tragedy, while analyzing Shakespeare's Othello, he said that there was no uh, Moorish general in Venetian Republic. There is no Moorish general who hold such highest position in Venetian Republic. There is no document of history available there. Now again, this is an application of external canon, because Othello is a fictional character. If you are searching into history that where is Othello, you will not find. How will you apply this external canon to the fictional world? It is something like that you are searching Oedipus in history. Oedipus is a fictional character. Hamlet is a fictional character. Othello is a fictional character. And Reimer is trying to apply the external canon to it. And if you are applying external canon to it, it is dangerous, critically dangerous. This sort of mistake, what Richards is claiming, is less insidious, but Ruskin, another critic, Richards gave example of this other critic who is fond of the analogous sort of mistakes in connection with the truth of drawing. If you don't commit a mistake like this, you will not able to find out the truth out of that particular text. Now, once again, my friends, if you are looking at the notes that we are discussing right from last 2-3 lectures, notes on truth in criticism, the first thing he talked about is of scientific truth and how scientific truth is different from emotive truth. Now, in emotive truth, what is happening in emotive use of language, the truth is somehow used in the sense of acceptability, that to accept all the characters. characters as it is, those who are appearing, those who are coming into fictional world, and how this has a counter argument in the form of Thomas Reimer, how Walter Pater talked about acceptability. We have seen all those things in the second note of that. Now, moving ahead to the third note, what is truth in the third way? He is saying that truth may be equivalent to sincerity. First is scientific truth, the difference between scientific truth and emotive truth or poetic truth, you can say. Scientific truth and poetic truth. Second one is acceptability. And the third one is sincerity. Now, this character of sincerity, as Richards is talking about, the sincerity, this character of artist's work, he has discussed in one of the earlier chapters that what exactly it means by sincerity. And in the principle of literary criticism, chapter number 23, which is Tolstoy's, you can say, infection theory, he wrote a complete chapter, chapter number 23 in the book, Principles of Literary Criticism. The essay which we are discussing is chapter number 34 in Principles of Literary Criticism. Now, what he is claiming, he is saying that we have already discussed about the character of sincerity. What is the characteristics of sincerity that Richards has discussed about? Richards says that what is the most important idea of communication in Tolstoy's perception or Tolstoy's insistence upon communication is somehow not common, which is known to everyone. It is something very different. What Leo Tolstoy said, because Richards is taking support of the analysis of sincerity made by Tolstoy, and he's applying this idea of sincerity in the understanding of truth in criticism. Truth is equivalent to sincerity, and how sincerity is discussed, how sincerity is becoming part. And what Tolstoy insisted about upon communication is that, and I quote, what remained of immense importance, what remained of immense importance was the idea that a work of art was not the record of beauty already existent elsewhere, but the expression of emotion felt by the artist and conveyed to the spectator. On this note, he formulates his theory and he says art becomes more or less infectious in consequences of three conditions. The first condition is in consequence of a greater or lesser peculiarity of the sensation conveyed. Second, in consequence of greater or lesser clearness of the transmission of this sensation. And third one is in consequence of the sincerity of the artist. This is what is important for us. in consequence of the sincerity of the artist, that is, of the greater or lesser force with which the artist himself experiences the sensation which he is conveying. What is Aristotle's idea of communication? What is Aristotle's idea of sensation? What I'll make it in a simple words. I'll make it simple to make you to understand. What Tolstoy is saying, that whatever things the artist produced, those things are not having any different idea of beauty, because beauty is already existed elsewhere. Beauty is already existed. Now please remember, this is what Plato also said about thrice away from reality. So beauty is already existed somewhere, but the expressions of the emotions of that particular beauty, what sort of expressions of emotions, and those emotions felt by the artist, the emotions experienced by the artist, he is trying to convey that emotions to his spectators. He's trying to convey that emotions. That means he is working as a mediator. Even you can, if possible, you can remember the definition or idea of Wordsworth also when he talks about poetry. What Wordsworth used to say, spontaneous overflow of powerful feeling, recollected in tranquility. That means somewhere you have seen that, you have experienced that. And when you are sitting alone, you recollect all those things. That means what Tolstoy is saying is the thing in a different way. And that's why the sort of infection, don't take infection in negative sense. The sort of infection that the artist has experienced, he's trying to make this infection common to the people. So he's passing on his emotions, conveying those emotions to the audiences, to the spectators. And in that case, he is talking about how this sensation will reach. It will reach with the three different types of three conditions. One condition is, it is the peculiar thing that how this sensation is conveyed. Second thing is that how this transmission has taken place. And the third thing, which is important, what Richards is talking in this particular essay of the two uses of language, is the sensation. The sincerity of artist is that whatever self experience he got of this sensation, he is trying to give this sensation in the way he receives it, whether it is in greater force, whether it is in with a lesser force. The way he receives is he is trying to give all those things in the same fashion as he received it. He is not making any change into it. That's why he's sincere. And when he's talking about this sincerity, Tolstoy also mentioned that the sort of experience that the artist experienced, the sort of experience artist is carrying with himself, those experiences may be of the utmost intensity. They are being conveyed. And Tolstoy is speaking of the experience as evoked by the artist in the course of communication. So it is this sincerity that Richards is talking about when he is saying that the character of artist work that whatever experiences he is having with himself, he is trying to give the same sort of experiences with the same greater or lesser force to the spectators, to its readers, to its audience, with utmost sincerity. So, if you, and that is what Richards is pointing out, that it may be perhaps most easily defined from the critic's point of view negatively. If critic is defining the thing once again according to his perception, then this perception will appear in a negative sense. This perception will not come it in real sense, it will be taken in a negative sense, it will be appear into negative sense, because apparently the attempt on the side of the artist, the attempt made by the artist to work its effect on readers, to work its effect on sharing the emotions sincerely, which do not work for himself. He is trying to pass on, he is trying to give those emotions to the spectators. Now, if you are commenting on that emotions, the point of view would be taken negatively. That's why what Richards is saying, two simple definitions must be avoided when you are trying to comment on the motives part of language. You should avoid simple definitions for this. And then for this, he gives an example of very famous Scottish folk. Robert Burns, one of the most important poet, Scottish poet Robert Burns, who wrote a well-known song, A Fond Kiss. And this Burns writing, what Richards is trying to bring out. If you're talking so simple, you need to avoid the simple definitions. Why? Because he's proving this particular statement by giving an example of Robert Burns, very famous poet, A Fond Kiss, a Scottish poet. Now, this Scottish poet, when he is, you can say, departing, when he is, you can easily point out, my friends, that when he is parting with his beloved, the name of the beloved is MacLehose. When he is parting from this MacLehose, this beloved, he wrote this particular poem. Now, the sort of anxiousness or anxiety that Robert Burns is facing, is following in giving an expression of partition with his own beloved. If you are finding it out that he is trying to get, because in real life, Burns, let me give a little bit of historical evidence to you so that you can able to understand that how the anxious or anxiety that Burns faced. If you're talking very simply about Burns' anxiety without knowing it, because it is applied to real story of his life. This poem he wrote almost in 1791-92. That is 18th century. And Burns regularly travel to Edinburgh, where he is having in platonic relationship with a lady called Agnes MacLehose, and they have a regular correspondence, and they used to meet with each other with the pseudonames. But when Agnes MacLehose has decided to leave Edinburgh and to stay in Jamaica with her husband, Robert Burns wrote this particular poem, A Fond Kiss, which is a very famous poem in, you can say, Scottish poetry. Now, the sort of experience that Nancy, or Agnes, to whom he called as Nancy MacLehose, is having while escaping from this relationship. She's escaping from this relationship. Now you can multiply this thing with similar instances. You can find similar instances taking place in the society. That lovers are departing. Even you will find Byron's very famous poet, When We Two Parted. There you will find out they are departing, they are leaving with each other, they are going away from each other. Now you can definitely multiply these instances. Now, when you're multiplying these experiences, when you are living, when you are talking about this thing, when you are living with these instances, you will find out, my friend, this is what the art is expected to do about. This is what the art is expected to bring it out. The art is trying to give you the sort of experience, and with that experience, you will find out multiple instances taking place. You can apply it to most of the incidences with your understanding. And that's why Richards is saying that you cannot apply simple definition to it, that because it is a they are departing, and that's why he wrote this. No, this is not a simple thing to take. What sort of experience, what sort of feelings that he find it out, the anxiety that he feels, the anxiousness of MacLehose, that you find it out without taking name of MacLehose when Burns wrote that poem, the sort of anxiety that you find out in the language of that particular poem, you need to understand that language at first, the experience that he's sharing very sincerely with. So you cannot simply say and get excused of that whole experience. You cannot move away from that. That you have to. He's saying this. It is absurdly naive view upon the matter. Now, again, he is taking another, because when you want to prove your statements, you will go for examples after examples as a secondary source to put your point. You make to make clear your point. When he's making this point, Richards is trying to make this point very clear, and he is using another example, and he quote the another example of the very famous article published in Times Literary Supplement in 11th July 1922, written by Clayton Brock. And Clayton Brock wrote an article titled "What is Art?" This is what also Tolstoy said earlier. And in that essay, they used to talk about, in that article, they discuss that the subject or the art, or Clayton begins a talk about very popular subject of experience. And Clayton Brock said that the nature of art and of beauty is simultaneously confusing as well as it is thrilling also. So the problem about the nature of art and aesthetic sense is so confusing that it is hard to pinpoint what is the actual problem really is. It is difficult to pinpoint what the actual problem is. Art is trying to give you the thing what is reflected in it. And if you are not able to understand what exactly it is being said, and that's why, my friends, most of the time when we read a poetry, most of the time when we try to understand a poetry, we feel it difficult to understand it because the sort of experience that the poet is trying to share with us, we are not familiar with that sort of experience. But we are trying to find out the same incidences that we can get it after reading, after understanding that particular poem. We are trying to collect those experiences. So it is difficult to pinpoint what the actual problem really is. And this is what the matter, what he is telling, that it is an absurdly naive views, that if you are giving, that it is simple to say that it is only a poem of partition, then you are giving a naive views about it. And that's why we have to understand that we have to believe that the artist is inspired by something, or he would not move his audience away from the experiences that he shared. We have to understand it, we have to accept it, because it is not like the orator who is harangued any kind of exaltation, who is giving any sort of examples while in his oratory to make his oratory most impressive. He try to make you to give a lot of exaggerated ideas and exaggerated information and exaggerated views. And an orator, when he is trying to talk, you are not even saying that this orator is somehow talking like this because uh, of his pride, or because he has taken too much of champagne and that's why he is speaking in that way. You cannot say like this when you are reading a poem, when you are reading a creative work. The level of artist, the way he is in a different situation, this different situation, the way situation arises in front of the artist and the experience that he faced at that time, those experiences he's sharing it with sincerity, and those experiences are appearing to the spectator very effectively because he is comfortable in sharing those experiences with a sincere approach, which a sincere attitude. And that's why Richards is saying truth is the another name of sincerity, that you are finding out in any literary work, finding out in any creativity. And that's why when you are trying to put certain external canons to it, external circumstances to it, then those external circumstances at that time become irrelevant for it. You cannot apply external circumstances to it, but you have to understand that the internal circumstances, internal evidences, that the poem, that the creativity is trying to give it to you, is creating a sort of impulse in, is trying to develop a sort of impulse in your understanding. And that's why you can able to find out, that's why you can able to get it, my friends, the sense of that creative work. And that's why you need to find out, you need to see that the probity and sincerity of an artist who's involved into that particular situation is most important aspect in creating impulses of the spectator. So the third important point when you are trying to find out truth is sincerity. And if you are able to find out sincerity in a correct tone, then it is possible for you to understand the criticism. Then you can apply your critical nuances to it. In that way, Richards talks about the three different notes of sincerity. The first is the scientific sense. What it means by scientific truth and poetic truth is the first difference that Richards has discussed. The second thing is truth is the most usual sense is of acceptability, and the third is the sincerity. He has given various examples to understand all those things, and in that way, he is trying to bring out that these are the two uses of language which makes you to understand how to use it, and when you are using it for the sake of criticism, what sort of things you can apply it for understanding of criticism. That's why it is called as practical criticism. That's why it is known as practical criticism, that how to apply it, how to use it. And that's why the two uses of language, the one of the most important essays in his very famous book, The Principles of Literary Criticism, he has talked about how science works, how scientific references is to be collected, what is mean by references, how scientific references are collected, how science works on the references, what happens if references are distorted, and how it comes out of science, and then what is the fictional world, why you require a fictional world, what are the essential needs of establishing a fictional world, and once you establish a fictional world, how you are going to use the language in that particular fictional world. And when you are using the language in the fictional world, you will have some different understanding regarding to it, and so you cannot have a scientific way of using language to be applied to the fictional world, nor you can apply the fictional language to the scientific use of language. And that's why he has given an examples to make you to understand, and even he has given an examples of most of the things that creative writers used to have with it, with an example of W.B. Yeats or Lawrence. He has given those examples into his essays. And furthermore, he is talking about what are the proper uses of scientific language and what is the proper use of emotive use of language. He is talking about, then he comes to a note of truth, how it has been used in criticism, and then he's talking about all those three notes that we have discussed right now. So in that way, he talks about how these two languages, two uses of language, helps you to apply in criticism. So we here comes to an end with where we come to an end with this essay, Two Uses of Language by I. Richards. I hope that you understand it. If you have any queries, doubts, questions, you can send me. If you want to ask, you can ask. If not, you can send me mail messages that we can able to discuss that.